distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen. In Ghana, we cannot say somebody owns the country, but every 4 years, we queue to vote. And in doing so, we give our sovereignty and our power to one person to lead us. That person is given the power to act in our interest, even if we are yet to see anyone truly representing our interests in that office. But it is the President of the Republic who is given the power over all state institutions, including the security agencies, that must lead in the investigation and prosecution of corruption. I have always maintained that corruption can never be fought and won using the bottom-up approach. Power plays a significant role in this regard, and so if you have the MD being incorruptible, it is very possible that the MD will be able to force those under him or her up to the cleaner to do what is right. But if you have those at the lower floor of the hierarchy being incorruptible and being men and women of integrity, and those at the top being corrupt, nothing can change, because those down there don't command a lot of the resources. They don't command the power, and they don't make all the important decisions in the organization or in the country. So when it comes to the fight against corruption, our constitution gives the president almost every conceivable power, and we cannot help but look up to them to lead in the fight against corruption. Unfortunately, we have been disappointed time and time again whenever we look up to our leaders in this fight. In the words of the Iraqi poet Ahmed Mattar, we are a flock of sheep, and our shepherd is a butcher. But we cannot give up. That's why we are here this evening. That's why we vote in every election. And that's why in every election, corruption becomes a topical issue. And so we try to look at who can fight it better. In the 2016 election, candidate Akufo-Addo, who is leading this country today, said he had a solution to political and public sector corruption. He told us that if anybody wanted to make money, they should go into the private sector and not dream about serving in his government. Growing up, I had been told never to trust a politician. But Nana Akufo-Addo won my trust when it came to the issue of corruption. And I'm not alone in this regard. When the government started, however, I had a cause to write on social media that it was like going to the Kwame Nkrumah circle to buy an iPhone, well packaged. And then on reaching home, I realized it was a bar of key soap. After the resignation of Martin Amidu and the forcing of Daniel Yao-Domelevo out of office, I have no iota of trust in the administration to fight corruption. The Fourth Estate recently assessed the president's actions against corruption and revealed that the word corruption was missing in President Akufo-Addo's State of the Nation address. The two State of the Nation addresses delivered in January and March this year. It was the first time in 13 years since the word corruption or corrupt did not feature in this all-important speech. It could be taken to be a mistake if it was forgotten once, but to have corruption missing in two successive State of the Nation addresses is like skipping a meal for 48 hours. It couldn't be just forgetfulness. It probably might have been the lack of moral courage to mention that word. But if we are even generous enough to say that the president and his team forgot to talk about corruption, then we are here to remind them to go back to it. We are here to remind them about their solemn pledge to the people of Ghana, and to also remind them that there are consequences for treating that pledge sharply. Corruption is like a bed-bug-infested mattress. No matter how well you dress it, you can never have a sound sleep until those bugs are dealt with. The Ghana without aid rhetoric. The war against Galamsey, which the president has put his presidency on the line for it and failed, I must add. Poor healthcare and all the problems that are plaguing our country can never be addressed without first of all addressing the issue of corruption. We have problems with our security agencies and also the investigative bodies. But I have been involved with some of them, and I can say that when it comes to corruption, a lot of the time, the decision to prosecute or not is a political decision that is decided mostly at the office of the president. When I did a JIDA investigation in 2013, if there were 3 people that I thought they would be the first to be prosecuted, and there was enough evidence that a first-year law student who understood the case could secure conviction, these were Clement Kofi Humado, who was then the Youth and Sports Minister, RLG's boss, and also the Zoom Lion companies. But they decided to now prosecute the very small fishes, Abuga Pele and Philip Asibit, and even them, they had evidence to jail them. I later had a source at the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General who told me that on the morning they were going to court, there were at least 5 people they were going to charge or put before court. But there was a call from the office of the president to drop the 3 and proceed with only 2. In 2017, I did a documentary titled The Robbing the Assemblies. And the first series that aired, I had a call from the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Miss Gloria Ekufu. And she told me that the issues were so damning that she wanted an immediate investigation. And I said, why don't you hold on? We have other parts of the story that were coming up. And she said it couldn't wait. So that same day, she arranged for me to see then Deputy Head of the CID, Mame Tiwa Adodankwa, now the Commissioner of Police, and other investigators. I spent my weekends, used my resources, and supported the police to build a very solid docket. We met with the AG, her deputies, and prosecutors, and they requested more information. Eventually, everything was submitted, and the docket was given to Attorney General's Department in 2019. As we speak, nothing has been done about it. And it had to do with a number of fraudulent contracts, and there was evidence that at least 200 million Ghana cedis was paid, and nobody could trace where the work was done. And some of the companies that even received payments had not even been formed at the time their contracts were awarded. All of this has been left hanging. So when we say the presidency or the executive must lead the way in the fight against corruption, I say it knowing very well that journalists and others can do their part. But if those that are supposed to prosecute and take the matter to court are not serious, then we are not going to go far. Beyond the executive, I also think the media has a very important role to play in making public sector corruption an exception and not the norm. Like all manner of evils, corruption thrives in darkness. Unfortunately for the media, the noose around the neck of free expression gets tighter every single day. I know a number of journalists who are too afraid to practice critical journalism, especially in the last 4 years. The fear is so real that some are even too afraid to speak up. When you talk about the culture of silence returning, you get a number of people who come defending and attacking whoever wants to raise this topic. But I've been a journalist since 2011. actually 2010, since I left journalism school. But there has never been a period in my life as a journalist in this country that I feel so insecure and unsafe than I feel today. And I know a number of journalists and some civil society actors who feel same. We saw the selective closure of some radio stations, and at the Minister of Communications vetting, it was made clear. They went to the website of the NCA, pointed out to her that these other radio stations have not renewed their licenses. And she pretended she didn't even know what date of authorization meant, first authorization meant, and date of renewal meant on the website of the NCA, which pointed out to her that there was some selective application of the law. When that happens, what you tell some radio stations or media organizations is that if you don't shut up and then we are to apply a law in the future, we know who to come after. We all saw how an undercover agent was put on television, and then his name was mentioned. He lives in Medina. Anywhere you get him, attack him and I'll pay. And a leading member, a member of parliament of the governing party, said that Ahmed Swale was shot and killed in Medina, and today nobody has been held responsible. So if you're a journalist operating in this environment and you are someone who is not on suicide mission, you should have the cause to fear for your life. We know what happened to some modern Ghana journalists who were arrested by national security operatives. Their premises were raided, gun-wielding people, they put polythenes, covered their heads, detained them for at least 2 days, and one of them said they were actually tortured whilst they were there. And up till date, nobody has been able to point out to us that this was the crime these journalists committed. Recently, we're told about David Tamaklo, another journalist who was arrested and detained, accused of publishing falsehood, when in fact, the content of the publication was still on his laptop. He had only approached some people to get this done. Yesterday, we saw a City FM reporter, a friend, Caleb Kuda, who was arrested and handcuffed and treated like a criminal. And his crime was that he had put up a post about the abandoned Maslock vehicles parked at the National Security Yard. I actually did a comprehensive documentary on this phenomenon, and at the time, there were 350 abandoned vehicles. They were imported in 2016 to be distributed to GPRTU drivers, but the cost was so inflated that they said they wouldn't take them. In order to hide them from the public, they took them to the National Security Yard. There's a big yard, not the main National Security Secretariat. There were also some other vehicles, ambulances, that were also taken to the Air Force base to be hidden away from the public. So this journalist recently, in the wake of the Fix Ghana Now movement, posted a picture of the vehicles and said, this is the waste. And he had challenges. Government people came and said, look, what you are saying is not true, it's a lie. There's no single vehicle left there. And so yesterday, he decided to pass by the place and saw some of these vehicles, and decided to take the evidence. And I'm told he's on radio now, recounting how he was beaten. And later on, heavily armed policemen raided the station to arrest another lady who was said to have been sent those videos. I'm saying this to alert us to the reality that when journalists talk about the culture of silence and the fear and others, it is real. And they ask, why are you, Manasseh, talking about it? And you are also the first person who says there's culture of silence. The truth of the matter is that it shouldn't be so dangerous to talk about it. And I've read writings of P.A.V. Ansah, who was so critical that if some of us begin to write that way against this current administration, it might be something else. But he was writing in a period that we said there was a culture of silence. So when this is happening, it is obviously going to affect the media's role in the fight against corruption. I also want to add that if we are to make corruption an exception and not the norm in the public and political sector, then what we may need to do is to also task the security agencies to sit up and do their work. I know that the political class has a tight grip on the police, but I also know that some of the top security agencies, some of their members, willingly submit to the dictates of the politicians in order to serve their selfish interest. So if we have an IGP or a commissioner of police, for instance, saying that they are afraid to incur the wrath of the politician, then I think the constable, who is also sent every night to face armed robbers, also has the right to say that they will not go because they even face a more dangerous fate than the IGP or the commissioner. To this end, I would call on the police, IOCO, and other security agencies to desist from being tools in the hands of politicians and begin to act in ways that will earn them the respect and be strengthened to fight corruption. Unfortunately, these people, the security agencies, are often used as the tools to oppress people who want to stand up to the political class. But what they should know is that the effects of corruption is like rain. It doesn't fall on only one roof. Our fate and suffering are the same as theirs. And so to the police and other security agencies, before you become willing tools in the hands of the oppressor, remember the words of the Iraqi poet Ahmed Matar again. He said, and I quote, "I stood in my cell, wondering about my situation. Am I the prisoner or the guard, or that guard standing nearby? Between me and him stood a wall. In the wall, there was a hole, through which I see light, and he sees darkness. Just like me, he has a wife, kids, and a house. Just like me, he came here on orders from above." End of quote. And in Ghana, we very much understand what orders from above means. While we call on the police and state institutions to fix the corruption, we the people should also be willing to fix ourselves and get involved. The people should begin to see corruption as a dreaded monster that hurts everyone. Corruption is not an abstract thing that should be left to the civil society and a few individuals to fight. Before the lockdown, a lot of people took to social media to curse traders in our markets because some had increased their prices to as high as 100%. So if an olonka of Gary was selling for 5 cedis, the traders increased it to 10 cedis because people were rushing to stock their homes for the lockdown. But the same people who were angry about this 100% increment do not seem to care when there is corruption in the public sector and contracts are padded. In 2017, for instance, the Robbing Assemblies documentary, there was one angle I discovered. A single contract was inflated by more than 130 million Ghana cedis. And this contract was supposed to be for the procurement of waste bins and then bin liners, the rubbers we used to cover the waste bins. At the time, I traveled across the country and realized that if you went to the assemblies, we had hundreds of waste bins abandoned there. And the problem was this: the government procured 150 to be distributed among the assemblies so that they would give them to households. Then in the rural communities, people don't generate much waste of plastic. So they were taking them and using them to store water. So the assembly said it isn't meant for water storage. So we are going to perforate them. So when they perforated them, the communities also said, then take them, we don't even need them. So they were there rotting away. We still had about 55,000 to pick from the supplier. The supplier wrote to the government and said, come for your waste bins. And the government of Ghana at the time said, the ones we have taken, we haven't even finished distributing them. So wait, when we finish distributing 100,000, we will come for the rest. And so whilst the government was doing this, the chief of staff at the time, Julius Debra, ordered the Minister of Environment to go ahead and procure 1 million pieces of waste bins. You ordered 150,000. You couldn't finish distributing them. Now you are going to procure 1 million. And anything to do with sanitation in this country, and that sector is full of rot. One company, the Jospon Group, there were 5 companies that were shortlisted for that project, and all the 5 companies belong to the Jospon Group. In another contract, which I also exposed, there were 11 companies that were single-handedly picked for another contract, and all the 11 companies belonged also to the Jospon Group. The problem with this waste bin contract is that this contract that should have cost us 900,000 cedis ended up being over 63 million Ghana cedis. And this was the story I did that I had the Ghana Journalists Association issuing a press statement attacking me for trying to destroy a profitable local business. At the time, people did not make any noise. So why would Ghanaians be so much concerned about the fact that the market woman has inflated the price of Gari by 100%, but another contractor that is doing business with the government has inflated a price by over 6,600%, and nobody seems to care? The reason is that when it comes to corruption, some people feel that because the money is not from their pocket, they do not care. But it is about time people realized that the reason there are no beds in the hospital is because of corruption. The reason we are facing doomsday is not that Ghana is too poor to be able to have stable power. It is because of corruption. Corruption is the reason we don't have water flowing in our tap. I have not had water flowing through my tap for the past 3.5 months. But that is not a worrying situation. The worrying situation is that I find it normal. And that's how a lot of us feel. So until we stop seeing corruption through the political binoculars of the NDC and MPP, those mandated to address the situation will never set up. When Ghanaian youth got serious over the course of last week, we saw the finance minister addressing a press conference on a Sunday. And that is unprecedented. They will begin to set up if they know that we are serious. I know that in an election year of 2020, President Akufo-Addo would never have dared to force Mr. Domelevo out of office if we, the citizens, had given him enough warning that we would not sit down for the president to hound out the most distinguished public figure in the fight against corruption. I would want to go to the final group or category that I think should play a very important role in the fight against corruption, and that is the judiciary. And I'm happy there are a lot of distinguished judges here. When it comes to the fight against corruption, I think the judiciary becomes is where the anti-corruption chain should end if there is a meaningful transition in the processes. Unearthing corruption in itself is very difficult. We know corruption is so prevalent in this country, but we haven't gotten to that level that we begin to issue receipts for corrupt transactions or bribes. So in order to be able to nail somebody with evidence, it becomes difficult. Unfortunately, sometimes the executive does not care to even prosecute. And the few that get to the courts sometimes don't come out well. I think the judiciary must do more and give the Ghanaians or every Ghanaian a hope that they would not tolerate any form of misbehavior should it get to the courts. Our political class, there are a number of people in our society that have become untouchable because they have money. Once something is about them, they know they can get away with it. But if we get to the point that the politicians themselves begin to realize that once I get to the courts, I'll not have my way, they will sit up. It is in this regard that I became a bit disappointed when the judiciary of this country played the role of an accomplice in the hounding of Daniel Yaodomelevo out of office. The High Court ruling, which I read with a lot of disappointment because I had taken the time to follow the issues, created the impression that the Auditor General did not give Osafo Marfo and his people in the Kroll Associate contract the opportunity to respond. But that was not the case. The Auditor General gave them ample time to respond even to the management letter, which they did not do. So if the judge was minded to cite Domelevo for contempt for failing to respond to a court process within the stipulated time, then the judge should have taken note of the fact that a management letter which was issued in March, and they had about 30 days according to the law to respond. They never did it until June, when Domelevo issued the report and submitted to Parliament. So to say that they didn't give them the opportunity to respond was not accurate to begin with. They only responded when the audit was completed and the report was submitted to the Parliament of Ghana. The Auditor General served them with a notice to surcharge and disallow if they did not satisfactorily justify the payment that was made to Kroll Associates. Again, they offered the explanation which the Auditor General was not satisfied and so proceeded to surcharge and disallow them. So if you read a judgment that had this conclusion and you know the facts that were presented in court and they are in the documents, you feel saddened. A reason they gave for not providing the Auditor General with the documents and justification was that the information was highly confidential and had national security implications. It is instructive to note that the senior minister and anybody who cares can find out. Senior minister and his people never ever mentioned this fact about confidentiality throughout the audit. They only brought it up when the notice to surcharge and disallow was served them. And at the time, the audit had been completed. The High Court eventually sent the matter to the Supreme Court to determine whether or not the facts or the information or evidence they were keeping away from the Auditor General was indeed exempt or it had national security implications. And it must interest you to know that this piece of information had already been distributed to a number of institutions, such as the Senior Minister's Office, Cocoa Board, IOCO, and others. So if you can give this information to a lot of institutions, there wasn't any justification to have kept it away from the Auditor General. So I was curious to know what the Supreme Court would say about this piece of evidence that was kept from the Auditor General. Interestingly, the Supreme Court did not rule on this matter. It asked the Auditor General and his team to go and inspect the documents. And I know that the Auditor General's argument, even at the time of the referral of this matter, was that the audit had been completed. So if I come to you and you've been giving money to buy 10 cars and I come to audit within a period, and then I could not see the 10 cars, I saw only 5 cars. Then after surcharging and disallowing you, you even go to bring the other 5 cars and say, come and inspect and clear me. That he mentioned a number of breaches to the audit process. But we all know that when he was finally ordered to go and then inspect these documents, the president asked him to step aside. A day after stepping aside, their own stooge, who they appointed, is somebody who plays to their advantage, went and said, well, everything is all right. They go back to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court tells the High Court that you can go ahead. The person who was even having issues with the evidence, that's the Auditor General, according to the final judgment that came from the High Court, was satisfied with it. And so I believe that if the Supreme Court had gone ahead to rule and said that this information should not have been exempted from the Auditor General, then Osafo Marfo and his people would not have had any reason not to have given it to him. The other disappointment I also saw from our judiciary was when some civil society groups and then Professor Stephen Asare took the matter of the forced leave to the Supreme Court, and the case had not been heard until 7 months later when the Auditor General was asked to leave office. This is one of the worst things I have experienced within our judiciary. On Newsfile, it was said that the judiciary had mentioned that the delay came from the parties. But I know if Ghana's judiciary wanted to deal with this important matter in 2 weeks, they would have dealt with it and pronounced the constitutionality or otherwise of the president's action. Sadly, some of the people said, well, the reason we took the matter to court has become moot, so we don't even want to pursue it again. And this is very worrying. I know our judges go through a lot. I know that it is a sacrifice. I happen to know one man before he was made a Supreme Court judge. And after he was made a Supreme Court judge, I visited, and then there was a program and some people were there. And this man, who would have controlled 90% of the conversation throughout, was forced to just be on his phone. He became, let me say, dumb and deaf. So it made me realize the kinds of sacrifices, what people would have to forgo their own lives to do what they have to do. So if after all these sacrifices, we don't follow through some of these things, it end up offsetting the good works of the judiciary. To be able to tackle corruption, I would suggest that the Chief Justice should consider some reforms. When it comes to corruption cases, they should fast track them and then deal with them expeditiously, so that if somebody is charged and within 6 months the person is going to jail, others will know that we are no longer joking. There should also be barriers. The barriers in the way of journalists should be removed. These days it's becoming so common that once you promote a documentary on corruption, the people go to court to place an injunction on it. A colleague of mine at the multimedia group, Kwetenate, tried to air a documentary, and the people went to court to place an injunction, and it was dealt with after 2 years. And journalism deals with time. So sometimes if you don't act on it quickly, the time will elapse. In November, I premiered a promo that the documentary would be aired on the 12th of November. It was a documentary that cited the head of legal at the FDA in a $200,000 bribery scandal. That afternoon, we were served with a notice of injunction. That was on the 12th of November 2020. As we stand, the substantive injunction case is yet to be heard so that the documentary can be aired. So if the courts can also try to fast track some of these processes, it would give journalists the free hand to work. I think on my part as a journalist, the parliament and other institutions should also champion the passage of anti-SLAPP laws. In the US, they have SLAPP laws, strategic lawsuits against public participation, that very rich business people and others can decide to take journalists to court, not because they have a case, but just to frustrate the processes. Between 2015 and 2020, I was sued 5 times for defamation, so 6 times. But the first 5, whenever I filed my defense, they all ran away, including Zoom Lion, RLG, and others. They had the money to pursue, but our defense was strong. There are other media houses that don't even have the money to pursue these cases. So when the threat comes, they also back out. So if Parliament would consider passing anti-SLAPP laws, it would help journalists to do their work. Distinguished audience, the fight against corruption is becoming a hopeless one, even if you ignore the danger. But I think we should not give up. If with all the hard work, we are not recording impressive results, it can only get worse if we decide to give up. Thank you so much for your attention.